What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome in everybody for season 2 of Bible study with an ex-pastor. We spent an entire season in the book of Genesis, and I'm gonna be absolutely honest with you. When we started that, I had no clue we were gonna make it through all 50 chapters. I thought maybe, hey, we get through 3 or 4, interest would die out, and we'd move on. That's not what happened. Like, this has been like really one of the most popular shows on the channel for a lot of the right reasons. Let's just be honest, for all the right reasons. I see some of you in the chat already. So glad to see you. Look at her, so excited about this. Man, you ain't as excited as me. I promise you that. I promise you that. But let's see. We're going to see. Because I am amped. And Alyssa is so glad to see you. It's been great having conversation with you in the Discord. We might as well go ahead and make you an honorary champion of the community because you be in there doing a dang thing, and we really do appreciate that. Oh, man, been looking forward to this. I love it. Like, it really makes me want to break out in song. Like, I can feel it coming in the air tonight. That type of situation. Oh, there's my wife. There goes my baby. She has jumped in the chat. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if I'm going to be popping up chats all night long. It is what it is. Now, if you do a super chat, obviously that's going to catch my attention. But other than that, like, I'm super duper excited to have our special co-host. And that's the conversation we just had before coming out, is that I let him see, look at her. Somebody got it. Somebody got it. Hey, Mr. King, you caught the reference. Because of that, I love you for that. I'm weird like that. But we had this conversation before coming out where we kind of made it clear that Jason is not my guest. He's a co-host. So he and I are going to be driving this conversation. And the reason why we want it that way is because he and I come from different ends of the Christian spectrum. We've spent our whole lives interpreting the Bible in vastly different ways. And so that's going to make this conversation, in my view, probably one of the best we've had in Bible study with an ex-pastor. All right, so I think that is enough of an introduction. If for those of you who don't know, yes, this is live. This is really live. So do me a favor. Share this right now, right? Go ahead and share it on Facebook. I don't know if you can share it on Instagram and TikTok, but if you can, do the damn thing. You know what I'm saying? Get it out there on the Twitterverse, or is it the Xverse now? Ooh, so are men on X the X-Men? Okay, see, that's going to be a whole nother other rabbit trail. That's going to have to be another conversation. All right, so if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider joining this community in the many ways that you can. If you want to financially support, Patreon and the YouTube membership program are excellent ways that you can do that. And if you just want to get connected and get involved, then man, our Discord is growing right now. And the conversations in there are absolutely amazing. I've been doing my best to get involved more, and I'm really loving what people are bringing into the community. And last but not least, we have merch, and I'm just gonna say it, we have some of the dopest merch in the game. I don't know if Jason has merch on his channel, so it may have to be a competition. We may have to do a competition of who has the best merch, and so we'll do a fundraiser throughout the entire month of Exodus driving merch. I don't know, I'm just spitballing, and I've been drinking a little bit, because what's Bible study without a few shots? You know what I'm saying? All right, so are y'all as excited as I am to bring Jason on? Because, let's see, I've been talking for 4 minutes and 52 seconds, and normally in a pre-recorded Bible study with an ex-pastor, it probably takes me 15 minutes to get in. But today, I'm not going to take too much of your time. I am bringing Jason to the stage. Jason from Dragons and Genesis, welcome to Bible study with the next pastor, man. So glad to have you here with me. Holla at us. Tell us about your story, what you do, and why you're here hanging out with this weird black dude, man.
Well, first off, it wasn't really my choice. I mean, getting abducted and thrown in the trunk of your car was a pretty compelling reason to be here. I mean, that duct tape, it took a few arm hairs off. I won't lie.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
It's all good. As far as merch goes, I think my Bible study shirt, with the Pornhub logo, I get a lot of compliments on that.
Catch that.
Yeah, yes. I think I automatically get a few points for that.
There are points there for damn sure.
Yeah,
damn,
yeah.
I didn't expect.
I'll try to get a link and share it with you guys. But yeah, I do sell these.
Man, I want that immediately now. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
holy shit, that's dope.
I'm
I'm
proud of
sorry.
that one.
Yeah, for sure.
No, so I grew up Catholic. The one true faith. I was the real deal. Like church every Sunday, all the sacraments. Confession, communion, confirmation. All the big C's. I was actually studying to become a catechism teacher. There's this book called I think it's called like the New Catholic Catechism, and it's like thicker than the Bible, and it's like the official church stance on everything. Like, can you be cremated as a Catholic? Chapter 47 has the answers. Like everything if you can think of it, they've talked about it, okay? And it's in this one book. And I had read this entire book whenever I was like 20, because I was like gung-ho about this. Co-founder of the youth group at my church, just all sorts of things, okay?
Wow.
And I had like some questions, and I wasn't satisfied with the answers I was getting. So I did this thing that most Catholics don't do. I started reading the Bible. And that's not like a diss against Catholics. A lot of their theology just comes from external sources, Justin Martyr and stuff like that,
Yeah. Well, see, I don't know if that's on my end or your end.
Oh, did I go away?
Oh, there we go. You're back.
Okay, I'm back. Yahweh's upset with me already. It happens.
Look at there.
No,
well, that is the name of the episode, that this is already off to a bad start. So look at there.
Yeah, see? It was a prophecy. You foretold this. So no, I had all these questions, and I went looking for the answers, and I started just getting more questions because things didn't quite add up. Yeah. And when I got into the story of Noah, I'm reading about how there's like 2 of every animal, but then there's 14 of the kosher animals and 2 of the not. And I'm like, wait, what?
Wait a minute.
Hang on. There's like duplicate everything in here. And I look at the margins, because I had like this nice study Bible, and it talks about the documentary hypothesis and how there are multiple sources that are being used here. And these are 2 completely different stories that have been crammed together. Yes. And that actually had like which verses are for which one. So I went through and I highlighted these things so I could just read all the highlighted stuff and get one story of Noah, and then read the non-highlighted stuff and get the other story of Noah. And I was like, oh my God, there are 2 completely different and contradictory stories about Noah's flood in this one thing.
Wow.
And so then I had to like go out and start buying books about this to try to figure it out while I'm reading it. And long story short, studying the Bible on the first read through turned me into an atheist. By the time I finished the Bible, I was like, I don't believe in a deity anymore, which was kind of scary. But then it kind of left like this hole that it was basically this curiosity, like where did this come from and how did we get this book? And I figured, I'll get a couple books, I'll read them, and I'll have all the answers. I'll solve biblical studies, in a year.
Wow.
Spoiler alert. That's not actually a thing. So fast forward several years, I've got bookshelves full of books on biblical studies, multiple different versions of the Bible from different source texts, and all this different stuff. And I'm like, my brain hurts, and I have even more questions than before. And somewhere along the way, I decided to start a podcast because that's just what you do. And here I am, like, I think 9.5 years later or something. Wow. I've been going through chapter after chapter, just doing, trying to do a comprehensive Bible study of the entire thing, not skipping any parts of it at all. And even covering books that might not be in your Bibles. Like, we're going to be doing the Maccabees, which most
Yes.
Bibles don't have that. We
That's right.
covered Enoch, or at least First Enoch. There's three of them. We covered First Enoch. We're going to be doing Jubilees. We covered parts of,
Wow.
or next week we're going to be doing Daniel, and it has like there are multiple chapters of Daniel that your Bible doesn't have,
Wow.
including a second version of the story where he goes into the lion's den.
Yeah.
There's actually an older version of that chapter that is in some Bibles, and we're going to be covering that. Another thing,
Ooh.
Bel and the dragon, where like Daniel fights a dragon.
What?
It's in some Bibles, and because it exists in some Bibles, when we cover the book of Daniel,
Yes.
we throw that in there. It's in there.
I love that.
So yeah. There's this awesome scene where like Daniel is starving to death in this pit, and Yahweh sends an angel to fly to Judah, pick up a prophet by the hair, fly him to Babylon, and
That
make him
sounds painful.
drop his lunch in the pit, and then flies the dude back to Judah to drop him off. That's in there.
Wow.
And so yeah, stories that are, if they're in a Bible,
Yeah.
not necessarily your Bible, we cover them. So yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. And then I guess eventually when I finish up with the New Testament, because the Old Testament will be done next month or this month.
Wow.
Next week I'll be finished with Daniel, which is the last book of the Old Testament. I'm going to go back and redo the Genesis episodes because I'm not quite happy with them. I'm redoing all of Genesis, and then I'll be moving into the New Testament. Once that's done, I'll do a bunch of apocryphal books. And then after that, any other biblical adjacent books, the Gospel of Judas, there was like about 40 different Gospels that we know of, and we only use 4 of them. Every one of them that we have any pieces of, I'll be covering those, and all sorts of other stuff. A bunch of the Solomon literature. There's like 6 or 7 books supposedly written by Solomon. Most were written during the Christian period. We're going to do all of those. So yeah, lots of fun stuff.
No, let me ask you this. When you set out and started doing this, did you realize that this would be something that would be considered highly valuable to people, that people would be like, holy crap, this is interesting?
No, my idea was just to kind of get my thoughts organized, rattle off the information to kind of get it out of my head so I can move on. And the goal was to do the book of Genesis. And that's it. There was going to be no Exodus, no Torah, none of that. I certainly wasn't going to try to do the entirety of the Old Testament or the whole Bible. That would be stupid. Why would I do that? Why would I waste like a decade of my life on that? Here I am. I'm stuck doing it. So yeah, it was going to be about a dozen episodes to cover Genesis, and then I was going to be done with it. And it just didn't work out that way.
So it's pretty much the same way I approach this show, which they say sometimes that the greatest successes come out of this place of just trying to get something out of your system. It's where you're not even focused on the end result. It's something that's really important to you. But it absolutely has been amazing. And for everybody that's watching right now and that's engaging this conversation, before we even jump into this, and I think we have like over 27 people watching now, which is absolutely beautiful. I appreciate you all. This is a great reason to go ahead and like and subscribe to Jason's channel, Dragons and Genesis, because everybody out there that you're interested in that information where you're like, hey, these books I've never heard of. I've never heard of Maccabees. I've never heard of Judas. I've never heard of Judith. I've never heard of the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary, these other Gospels that are out there, the Gnostic Gospels. I've never heard of the Desert Fathers. I've never heard of the mythology that's intertwined within that. Here's a resource right here. And here's somebody who's doing this out of their own curiosity, which is really where you get the most value from. When people are doing things because it's their job or when they're doing things because I can get a check, they don't always put their all into it, but when it's someone's personal curiosity, like these are questions I'm trying to answer for myself, these are things I'm trying to figure out for myself, you're going to be amazed at the type of insight that you get. So at this moment, I'm making it my official recommendation that you really kind of need to get the Bible study with the next pastor and the Dragons in Genesis like combination pack. You need to go ahead and get all of that together. This is going to make it work for you. And the beauty of it, it's on YouTube. It's free. It's absolutely free. Right now. We know that capitalist God is up there doing its thing so soon. Man, we appreciate you, Norbert King, $10 super chat. Wow. Love you just in so many ways. Thank you. I know how money is precious, so that's always beautiful to me. We have some great people out here in the chat. Oh man. Oh, look at my wife. That's my baby. That's my baby. Purple is her color. Moonbeam Goddess just finished the Gospels of Thomas and Judas. I am just taken in. Wow. Yes. All right. So before we jump into this, and I pull up Exodus on the screen, we'll try to get through maybe 2 or 3 chapters. In this one, we'll see how good it gets. Chapter 1 may just be so packed that we don't know. But you tell me, within these first 3 chapters, are there any things that you're particularly excited about getting to?
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of weird Egyptian stuff that a lot of people may not be familiar with.
Okay.
Also, the fact that the first 5 chapters of Exodus weren't actually part of the story until later, they were added on at a later date. Exodus really originally started with chapter 6 and moved on from there. 1 through 5 was added on to kind of link it with the Genesis story. Exodus wasn't written as a sequel. Exodus was almost like a competing story to Genesis. It wasn't meant to be set in a certain time period. Exodus was kind of like an ideological tale of how the Jews got to the Promised Land. The same way that Genesis was. It was just, this was for 2 different groups of people. And around the same time period. So 586 BCE, the Babylonians come in, they destroy Judah, Jerusalem gets destroyed, the temple gets destroyed, a bunch of people get carted off, a bunch of others flee down to Egypt. Later, the Persians come in, they conquer Babylon. And sometime later, a bunch of these exiles, they go back into Judah and they settle. Around the same time, Persia also conquers parts of Egypt. And they basically get the Jews that are living down in Egypt to kind of be watchdogs over the Egyptians so they don't have any uprisings, okay? And they have these forts all over Egypt that are staffed by Jews, and they're working for the Persians. And during this time, you've got people going back and forth and stuff, and they basically have these ideological tales. People that are coming from Babylon going to Judah, and Jews coming from Egypt going to Judah, and they each kind of come up with these sort of origin stories. And from this, and also some other stuff, is where you get the whole idea about Genesis and Exodus and things like that. These are ideological tales for different groups of people around the same time. And if you actually go back into Genesis and the earliest mentions of Abraham, it talks about in the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, there was this man born named Abraham.
Yes.
The Chaldeans didn't rule over the city of Ur until around the time of the Babylonian exile. So it's basically saying Abraham was born around the year 580 BC. And it's just, they start rearranging all these stories to kind of assemble into one long narrative much later. And that's how we end up with this whole thing where there's like, this long line of stories. But originally it wasn't like that. You just had a whole bunch of different stories floating around. The whole purpose of the story of Joseph is just to get those guys from the promised land into Egypt, so they can then do the Egypt story. It easily could have been the other way around, where it started in Egypt and then it went to the promised land. Then you had all the Genesis stuff. So yeah, the whole thing timeline-wise is a giant mess.
Jason, you just blew my mind. Like there's so many things in what you just said, which I'm just gonna be flat out honest, I did not know. Like it's
fun stuff.
Like it's like there's so many rabbit holes that I want to go down now.
Yeah,
and I'm almost afraid that we may not get to the chapter tonight, and if we don't, that's okay. Yeah. Because this pretext is great for context.
Right.
And this is like, I never knew that there was this point in time that these, I feel bad sometimes just as a black man because of things that have happened in the country, saying Jewish because I don't want to be Kanye'd. But I didn't know that there was this time that there would have been these Israelites or these Hebrews in Egypt at a time who would have been. Now I am familiar with the Hyksos period. Would this have been any way connected to that period, or is that too separate?
Sort of. So a lot of people try to say that the Hyksos, which is this, for anyone who doesn't know, this is the group of Semitic people who went into Egypt, and they actually ruled over Egypt for several centuries. And then later, there was sort of like this uprising, and some Egyptians ousted them and sent them packing, and they went east, into like the Sinai, Arabia, maybe as far over as Syria. They just kind of, they went away, and the Egyptians were like, all right, good riddance. And then it kind of went back to Egyptian rule. And a lot of people said, oh, well, this is the Exodus, this is the people, Well, there's a few problems with this. First, like the timeline is all wonky. Like it would more closely match up if the story of Exodus, had been around at that time and were true to some extent, but it's really not. The second thing is we don't exactly know who these people were and where all they went. The third thing is there was this community at one of those forts I mentioned. It wasn't originally a Persian fort, but it was an Egyptian fort in southern Egypt, and it was there to kind of keep an eye on their neighbors to the south. And but later it was staffed by these Jews who lived there, and they had like their own temple and stuff, and they left this massive library of writings. And these are things that predate any copy of any Old Testament book by centuries.
Wow.
And there's all kind of correspondence and stuff. They were writing letters back and forth to the temple in Jerusalem. So there was all this correspondence. They would actually ask things like, how do we celebrate this particular thing?
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that these people, they had no idea about the Passover. In fact, they don't even call it the Passover. It's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And what's even crazy, so Jews living in Egypt at this time had, going all the way up to, I think, about 450 BCE, something like that, they had no idea about the story of Moses, about the Passover, that ever there was this mass exodus from Egypt. What's even crazier is they worshipped multiple gods, including Yahweh's wife. This was done openly. And when they're consulting with the Jerusalem temple at a time when supposedly Judaism was purely monotheistic, not only did the Jerusalem temple have no problem with there being other temples, which according to the Bible, there can't be. There's only the one.
Right.
So not only did they have no problem with this, they had no problem with these people having theophoric names concerning Egyptian gods, linked with like ISIS and stuff like that.
Yes.
They had no problem with them worshiping all these other gods. And whenever they explained things like how you celebrate the Passover celebration, and they too, the people in Jerusalem, they don't call it the Passover. They lay out how you do these things and when you do it, but they too have no idea that this is linked with their own origin story. So at this point, shortly after the Babylonian exile ended, and we now go into the Second Temple period, Jews on 2 different continents had no idea that the Exodus story was a thing. They also don't seem to have any idea about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. They don't even have those names.
Wow.
Like, you would, like, later in the Second Temple period, there's a ton of people with those names. It's like you look at their records and stuff, and there's all these people named like that because they're named after these great figures. But at the beginning of the Second Temple period, and we've got lists of like hundreds of people's names, and a lot of these patriarchs and stuff, their names just aren't showing up as common names for people. And there's even like Christian scholars who are like, yeah, we don't think that the Jews even knew about the story of Genesis in like, say, 520 BCE. We can't show that they knew about any of this stuff. If there may have been little stories floating around, but as far as a written text that was widely circulated, scholars are really starting to doubt that. It just doesn't seem like a thing.
That is like, dude, like you.
And as far as the whole Hyksos thing,
yes,
there is a link, but probably not what you think.
Okay.
So the oldest mentions of Moses that we have start popping up around the mid 300s BC, but they don't come from the Jews. They come from the Egyptians. And what it is, we've got a couple different stories. So one of them, so you know how you've got the story of Abraham, and he goes and basically his descendants form an entire people, right? And Jacob, his grandson, whose name changes to Israel, he has 12 sons, and each one of them forms a tribe. It would be like a man named George Washington who changes his name to America, and he has 50 sons, and each one of them starts a state,
Right.
That's an ideological tale of how the different tribes got here. It's not meant to be taken seriously. Cool, whatever. Well, they weren't the only ones doing stuff like this. The Egyptians had their own version. And in one of these that was written, or the earliest record of it is from the 4th century BC, but it probably went back before that. A bunch of their nobles went out from Egypt, and they founded cities and entire nations all over the Mediterranean world. And they're like, we had a dude who went out and he founded Athens, because of course Athens is Egyptian. We had a dude who went out and he founded Rome. And then they had this one guy, this Egyptian noble named Moses, who went and he founded Israel. And he organized 12 tribes to match with the 12 signs of the zodiac. And he does all of this, okay? And then they had another story. There was like a separate little bit of folklore in which there was this colony, I believe, of lepers that they sent to work in like a big rock quarry over in the Sinai. And they like got upset for the working conditions and everything else. And there was this Egyptian priest who kind of like took control over there, and he became their leader, and he changed his name to Moses, and he led these people in like this big revolt and stuff. And eventually they were like driven out, and they went over and they settled in Judah. And this story, it was inspired by the tale of the Hyksos, and it was this bit of folklore that the Egyptians made. So they took the story of the Hyksos and they turned it around a bit and they associated them with a bunch of lepers and all kind of stuff. And they're led by this Egyptian priest named Moses.
Wow.
And then he goes and, he does all this. Well, the writers of the Exodus likely knew these stories. And they were taking this Egyptian folklore and they were, the same way that the Egyptians took the story of the Hyksos and turned it around to make it one thing. Later Jews were taking the story from these Egyptians that was inspired by the Hyksos, and they took that folklore and they turned it around another way. And there's a lot of things in that story where the Jewish authors, they basically reverse it. Because in there, they're like the bad guys, but in the Exodus, now they're the good guys. And so, the whole thing is just folklore and, wishful thinking and kind of political propaganda type stuff. But that's your Hyksos connection. Stories about the real people got turned into Egyptian folklore, and that seems to have been borrowed some centuries later and became the story that we know of as the Exodus, along with other things like tales of Dionysus and Sargon and Hammurabi and Zarathustra and stuff like that. And we'll touch on all that stuff later.
Well, see, that's what's absolutely fascinating to me is that the way that you just explained this, it really helps to kind of normalize the Bible in a sense. And that was kind of some of the before show talk that we were kind of having, is that, this book separated from the superstition and separated from this ideal that we should live by it. It's just as fascinating as any other cultural group's stories that are narratives that they've created. Because outside of this idea of trying to attach our lifestyles or what we understand about the world to these things, it does give us insight into how these people kind of saw themselves, or at least how they wanted other people to see them. And it kind of gives us insight into just even some of the things that you're going to be pulling out and highlighting as far as the mythologies. Highlighting that comparative mythology gives us more insight to their relationship with other people groups. And so to me, these things are absolutely fascinating and worth their salt and gold. Now, before we move on, I do want to call out again, for those of you who have not seen, Jason has merch right behind him. Like he is shaming me to my face. Like he's just killing me. But it's a Bible study shirt. And for those of you who didn't know, yes, he is trolling the Pornhub logo hard, and it's working. I want that now. Like I kind of want, like, oh my God, that's dope. So please go check out his merch. We also got another super chat. Wow, dude, I really appreciate what you all are doing. I want to give back. Love y'all. Hey, we love you, man. Thank you for that type of support. Like, man, that blesses my heart, for lack of better words. I don't know any better word than bless as of now. It's kind of one of those Freudian things. So stick with me until I find something else, but absolutely beautiful. Thank you. All right. My final question before we jump into this chapter. Okay. So going through the book of Genesis, I was talking to people about, or going through the book of Genesis, I was talking to people about that I've always kind of had this understanding that Genesis was a setup for Exodus, and you just kind of just blew that out of the water in a beautifully amazing way. And so what I'd like for you to do is to give us some context into this Joseph story, from Joseph interpreting the dreams of Egypt, the dreams of the Pharaoh, and kind of getting this power of being second in charge of Egypt, restoring these people during a famine by giving them some what seems like sound economic advice, though I did end up realizing he kind of used it for his own good, and which I guess that's just what people do. But give us some insight into how Joseph's story is now intended as an I guess a later addition to tie us into where we're getting ready to pick up in Exodus chapter 1.
Right. So Joseph, that whole story is a mixture of two primarily a mixture of two different things. One, it's an old myth about a dying and rising God, and the other thing is it's the tale of the humble prophet ripped straight out of the pages of Zoroastrianism. So as far as the dying and rising God thing, so he gets betrayed by his brothers. He gets thrown into a pit. He's down there for several days. He gets pulled out. That's Jesus. Okay. That's Jesus. Okay. That's the underworld. Yeah.
Hey, you just did that. Yikes. I never saw that. But
yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Okay.
So yeah. That's him. And he actually serves the same role. He's supposed to be Yahweh, and his father Jacob is supposed to be El Elyon, the high Canaanite god. Yahweh is often associated with grain and land fertility. And what's the whole purpose of the Joseph story? He's there to get grain for the people of the land. And they just relocate the story to take place in Egypt so it can be, to merge it with the Exodus story. Because they need Moses, who Moses is just a retelling of Joshua. He also has little bits of Jacob's story thrown in there. Like Moses, he flees east in chapter 2. That is Jacob in Genesis chapter 27. He meets a woman at the well, Genesis 29. He enters into service with his father-in-law. That's Jacob in Genesis 29 and 30. God recalls him to go back west, Genesis 31. He returns home with a family. And then upon returning home, he gets ambushed by God. That's at the river, Genesis 32. So in the first chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Exodus, you just have a retelling of a bunch of tropes taken straight out of the story of Jacob. But Moses also has about 50 or 60 different tropes in common with Joshua. That's a whole different topic. I honestly think they were originally a lot like the same character. But so Joseph, he does this whole dying and rising thing, and his whole purpose then is to bring, prosperity and food and stuff, to the people of this thing. And you actually see this a lot in the Bible, especially in Genesis. You have a bunch of different deities that get reworked as people. Yeah, Abraham used to be a moon god. Isaac was a sun god.
I can see that.
The whole conflict between the two is the story of one trying to overtake the other. There's a ton of stuff like that. Samson was also a sun god. He was the sun god Shamash. That's why so many of his stories involve heat and fire and stuff. And he lights foxes on fire and they burn down the crops. And he carries a gate and he sets it on a hill so it can, and that's where the sunrise is. It's a bunch of solar imagery. Delilah, the moon goddess, she cuts his hair off. His hair symbolizes the rays of the sun. He goes down into the underworld and then he comes back and he's got his hair back and he defeats. It's a sun god. And Joseph is the same way. Joseph is meant to be Yahweh, who originally was a dying and rising god. He got killed by Leviathan. Then he came out triumphantly and he becomes resurrected. And then this gets redone, reenacted every year as a New Year's festival, and it brings, prosperity and fertility to the land and stuff. It's the old Canaanite Baal cult. It's the same story. And that's why Joseph's name is actually uses part of the word for Yahweh. I can't remember the exact meaning of it, but sort of like the same way that Israel means like the land of El. It's the same thing with Joseph. The other part of him is the humble prophet story, specifically the type used in the religion of Zoroastrianism. That's the world's oldest monotheistic religion. It's where Judaism likely got the idea from monotheism. Also, angels and the whole
Okay, we just
eschatology.
froze up a little bit. I am sure we'll.
Oh, let's see. Are we coming back? Maybe. Hopefully. Well.
Just for a few. Oh, we're back. Okay. All right.
Okay. Am I here?
Yep, you are here. I think we were both gone for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit this super sticker. Thank you, Trevon Fox, man. I appreciate you. I enjoy seeing you in the comments. I love you, sir. Okay. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with our internet. But yeah, man, keep going.
Uh-oh. Did we freeze again?
It looks like we're back. I don't know what's going to see. It must be the devil. Well, it's probably Yahweh. Probably be okay with this.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. So am I back? Is it working now?
Yes, sir. I see you.
Okay.
I see you and hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So the second major source for the story of Joseph is Zoroastrianism. Oldest monotheistic religion still in practice, comes from Persia, heavily influenced the Jews, especially like during the Second Temple period. And one of the stories in there, the prophet Zarathustra, he confronts this king, or really he confronts the king's magicians. What happens? He goes in there to kind of preach his religion about the worship of Ahura Mazda, the one true God. And these magicians, they don't like that, so he gets thrown into prison. This is where you get the story of Joseph thrown in prison. And then the king, his favorite racehorse gets sick, and the magicians can't do anything to fix it. So what they do is they get Zarathustra to come in, and the power of his god actually fixes the thing. And so the racehorse is miraculously healed, and it goes on to win races, and it makes the king happy. And so then the king converts to Zoroastrianism. And we have this same story going into to the book of Genesis being reworked for the story of Joseph. And I think he dropped. Let me see if he's still here. Okay, so it looks like I'm here and Darante's gone. That's okay. It's my show now. So anyway, hopefully, the host will come back. But so in the story, Zarathustra, he comes in, he does all of this, and that wins over the king. I think the magicians, the court magicians, got punished. And this little story of the humble prophet with the one true God coming in and humbling the court magicians and all that, it ends up, being so loved by the writers of the Old Testament that they use it, I believe 4 times in the book of Genesis, twice with Abraham, once with Isaac. And that's when he goes to Egypt and he pimps his wife to the Pharaoh.
Yes.
And then again with Abimelech in Gerar. And then Isaac does the same thing with Abimelech. And then the power of God triumphs, and then they're humbled and all that. The best one, though, is the one with Joseph. It matches the Zoroastrian story perfectly, including like the prison scenes. And then, of course, the book of Exodus it loves it so much that it just keeps doing it over and over. It starts with the serpent, the little staff. Moses
Hmm.
throws the thing down and he turns into the snake and all that, which is actually a serpent god that was worshipped in the Sinai. We'll touch on that later. And then after that, he goes on to do it 10 more times in a row. The same trick over and over and over again, borrowed straight out of the pages of Zoroastrianism. But that's where your story of Joseph comes from. It's the humble prophet trope from Zoroastrianism, and it's the story of Yahweh and basically every other dying and rising god of the time. And it's about land fertility, and also my God is better than your God.
Yep.
And they're like, if we do this, but then we just shift the action to Egypt, then it makes a great segue between these stories about guys coming out of Babylon and becoming Jews and stories about people coming out of Egypt and becoming Jews. Cool. And now it doesn't really cause much of a contradiction that two people from two different directions all came to the land and became the Jews. Cool.
Wow.
Awesome. We're done. Just don't look too closely.
Something that I don't think I had ever given myself permission to do was to recognize archetypes and tropes in the Bible. And so now that you're mentioning this, especially this archetype of dying and rising, I can now see it across several different characters in the Bible, that how it is just really the same story over and over again. And maybe for the first time in my life, I can actually see the connection of the Old Testament to Jesus, how he's literally just a repeat of the stories that have already been told.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, the gospel stories are just a mixture of the Old Testament and the works of Homer. They just write a whole lot about, Odysseus, and they just change his name to Jesus, which, and I'm not joking about that. The whole thing with the pigs, that's the story of Circe converting, there's like tons of stuff like that. It's the washing of the feet, that's the Odyssey. It's a ton of stuff like that. There's even like specific names that pop up in there. That's why there's so many like like you look at a map of that place and they don't have any kind of giant inland seas. They actually, gospel authors actually faced criticism back in the day, and people were like, there's no such thing as the Sea of Galilee. It was a small lake called Lake Kinneret. And it wasn't until centuries later, once Christians controlled the whole area, they're like, screw this, change the maps, make it Galilee so that Mark doesn't look like an idiot. All the stuff happens during a 10-hour crossing of the sea. You can paddle across it in like an hour and a half. There's no giant, tumultuous waves that wreck boats and stuff. They're like, no, just get out there in your little canoe and just scoot across the lake. It's a small lake. They did all that because the author of Mark, he really loved the Odyssey, and he was like, I want this scene in there. I want Jesus to do this. And so he just keeps throwing in scenes from the Odyssey. And he was using tropes from the Old Testament while doing it.
As an author, I can see that being done because I do that. I do that in my books.
That's why you see so many of these characters that look very similar. It's the same story. It's just they just keep redoing it. Sometimes they don't even change the names, like the story of Joshua and the story of Jesus. There's a ton of parallels. And in Hebrew, it's Yeshua. It's the same name for both guys.
It's the same name. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, there was more than a few, there was a Christian propaganda film that was called Joshua. And it was basically about this modern day Jesus character. And that was the whole attempt. All right. So I think we can jump into this and maybe we'll get through a chapter or two. Jason, man, you are a friend of my mind. I was already amped before, but after this past hour of hearing the insight you have, Like, this makes me exciting. When I was still in the preacher world, I had a mentor who said you can tell somebody knows what they're talking about when they can just talk about it on in. And and that's what I see here, is that you're not having to check your notes or anything like this. This is overflow information for you. This is information that you've really spent time in. And like, dude, I want you to know, like, and I'll probably repeat it several times throughout this season, is that like, this information is valuable, bro. You are a gift. You are helping people understand these things in ways that many of us, like, honestly, what you do, I couldn't do. I can walk through the Bible and help people see some sociological narratives, help people see how things have been used and misused, but the information that you bring, I couldn't do. So again, I am pushing you all. If you've not checked out Dragons and Genesis, I don't know what the fuck you're waiting on. You need to be subscribing like right now, because this is the type of information that he gives on this channel. And so then when you come back over here to watch Bible study with the next pastor, you have so much more insight to even appreciate the nuance. So bam, yes. And I'm going to do that a lot in these episodes. All right, so I'm going to pull this up on the screen and let me get us
this thing going.
Let's get it popping. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll do us down there. All right, so I'm gonna start reading, and you interrupt me anywhere you feel free to, and I may stop in some places, and then I'll take it off the screen for a while so everybody can see our beautiful faces, because they want to see us handsome, beautiful men out here, obviously, because there's not a lot of handsome men in the. I'm gonna stop. I was about to say something that was gonna get me in trouble, but okay, so let's go. Exodus chapter 1. Now, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came each one with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the people who descended from Jacob, who were 70 people, but Joseph was already in Egypt. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. Okay, so I just had a random rabbit that I'm going to take this down for a moment that I got to ask you about.
Okay, go.
There is a scene in the last few chapters of Genesis between Joseph and Jacob that has always bothered me. Now, as a charismatic, I had liberty to make it mean whatever the fuck I wanted it to mean. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how charismatics roll. It's the scene where Joseph brings his children, Ephraim and Manasseh, to Jacob to bless them. Mm-hmm. And Jacob crosses his hands and blesses the younger instead of the older. Now, I've always thought that was just because Joseph ended up marrying an Egyptian woman. And then I went back and thought about it, and I was like, but no, the younger always keeps getting blessed in this family for some type of reason. Do you have any insight on why that happened and what that motivation may have been and what that significance may be?
I know there was another significance that I'm just not recalling right now, but part of it is essentially like an underdog story, which that's a lot of what the Old Testament is. There's this great book called Why the Bible Began by Jacob L. Wright, and it's about like why these people wrote these stories. Not when, not how, but why. Why, yes. And it goes into like the psychology of it. I mean, these people, they had lost everything. Not only had they lost, their home, the city, their families, the temple. They lost their connection to their deity. They lost their God. I mean, like in there they talk about how the Jews, they don't have idols and stuff. No, that's crap. They used to. They had these these giant statues of their God, and sometimes Yahweh was represented by a huge bull, golden calf that that was not a foreign god. That was Yahweh. El was represented the same way. They had all these things, and that was their gods. And these things got taken by the Babylonians and melted down. Like their gods got turned into dinnerware. And it was horrible to them. This is like this extreme trauma. And these people living in a foreign land, they started to forge a new identity for themselves out of the ashes of defeat. Most people, their origin story is this great, triumphant tale. Theirs was, we got our asses kicked in the most humiliating fashion. And now we're just living as slaves in some other land hundreds of miles away, separated from our families. Everything is ruined. And from that defeat, they get this story. And they were not some kind of great military power. Judah, their northern, neighbors, the Israelites, were vastly more numerous, more advanced, significant military power, especially under the Omrides. They were somebody. Judah was like a backwater hill country. This was it was nothing. Jerusalem had for a while, it would have had just a few hundred people living in there. There was no one there. This was nothing. They didn't really start to become populous until Assyria took over a huge chunk of Israel, and a bunch of Israelites fled and went down into Judah. And that's where they had the big population boom, and they became significant. They didn't rule over Israel. Israel didn't care about them. They were nobody. Any tribe in the northern kingdom could have conquered and demolished all of Judah without breaking a sweat. So they were the underdog. But then later, after all this happens, they come out, they are now the center of everything.
Yes.
Persia is giving them the power and the authority to swing the hammer. And then later, as things go on, they get conquered a bunch more times by basically everybody. They're always the underdog. And then eventually, they kind of they become powerful again, and they kind of start kicking people out of their land. And they always see themselves as this underdog. They're the younger who isn't supposed to rule, but hopefully in the future will.
Ooh,
and that's the whole story of it. This isn't about a bunch of people. It's not about, an older brother and a younger brother. It's about a community of people who lost everything over and over and over again because they were weaker. And they're hoping it will be different the next time. And that's what that's about. There's also other things that I can't quite remember because it's been 9 years since I did Genesis.
Absolutely profound, because I will say marginalized communities, though they attach themselves to Jesus, it is typically the stories in the Old Testament where they kind of pull their strength from. It's those stories of Moses. It's those stories of Abraham. And it's for the reasons you just said. It's the why behind even why these stories were told. It's the rise of the underdog. When you separate it from this idea of, no, this was telling the truth, and you ground this is the idea of these are people trying to create their own motivational propaganda to set themselves forward, it becomes very clear. And again, coming from a marginalized community, it's those stories of Moses and of David, and typically of how they overcome hardships, how they come up. But that was a beautiful way to bring that back into Manasseh and Ephraim, about how that's what this is. This is this moment yet again, because again, you don't just see this with Joseph's kids. All the children in Abraham's lineage go through some version where the younger takes over what is supposed to belong to the older. And I don't, even though it was I was kind of subconsciously aware of that story there. I don't think that existed in the forefront of my mind that, that's the whole point. The point of the story is to reinforce this idea that you don't deserve it, but you're gonna get it anyway, type of thing. And that's right. That's fascinating.
And we still do the same thing in modern. It's it's never the high school jock who becomes the superhero. It's the young nerd who gets bitten by the radioactive spider. It's the same thing. We want the little guy to win.
Yes.
Isaac usurps the birthright of Esau. That's what this is all about. It's root for the little guy.
Yeah.
Oh, real quick before we move on. So Jacob, his descendants go in there. He ends up with like 70 descendants. This is the Canaanite gods here. Jacob is El Elyon, and this is his 70 sons who, according to legend, each one of them is governor of a different nation of earth. That's why the number 70 is there. These are the 70 gods of Canaan.
Wow. That's insane. Okay, so that's new information for me. Like that.
Anytime in the Old Testament you see the number 70 pop up, it has to do with a bunch of people, and they're probably the rulers of nations. That's the 70 gods of the Canaanite pantheon.
That makes absolute sense to me.
Yep.
Yikes. All right.
And Yahweh is the favorite one, and El gives the nation of Israel to Yahweh in Deuteronomy 32:8. Lovely little bit of polytheism they forgot to scrub out of the book.
Yeah, I definitely struggled through that when reading through the Bible, quite a few times. Like there were things in the Bible that didn't always sit right with me, but I was a part of a culture that had an excuse of why this was there. Because I remember just coming across the hints of Asherah in the Bible, especially reading through Solomon's story. You see how this Asherah is set up in the temple, and I'm like, oh, what's that about? And you do a little research, and you run into places that you don't expect to end up at.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see here. We dropped at verse 5. We'll pick up at verse 6. And Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation, but the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And ain't that a bitch? And he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. Okay, so I'm going to read a few more verses. Is there any reason that I should stop there, or am I safe to read?
No, go ahead. Keep on rolling.
Okay, beautiful. So they appointed taskmasters over them to oppress them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied. I preached this so many times. And the more they spread out, so that they dreaded the sons of Israel. The Egyptians used violence to compel the sons of Israel to labor, and they made their lives better with hard labor and mortar and bricks and at all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they violently had them perform as slaves. Now, okay, so I'm just going to interject right here. Easier said with Meg. I will make sure we get that link in the description. Actually, it might already be in the description. Check the description. But I want to interject right here. And Jason, I don't know if you're aware of this, but this particular chapter right here is the reason why so many black people believe that the Bible was true. Because it sounded so much like our American story. And from Exodus through Deuteronomy, we see a lot of that reinforcement of this idea. And so again, like, that's why I had to stop and make that caveat, this part of where the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied. That is such a famous sermon amongst informed black preachers. And it's like every Black History Month, you're going to hear this type of story. The more they oppressed us, the more we multiplied. And and it's almost like the real reason that you're dealing with what you're dealing with is you were so great that these people had to find a way to stop you. You were expanding so well, you were doing so well. And so this story is like highly tied to the black community for many reasons. Do you have any insight on where we get to this point where it's like, yeah, we were slaves and the Egyptians are basically persecuting us just because we're multiples in number?
Yeah. This little section is sort of like a reversal of the Hyksos story. The Hyksos ruled Egypt for like 3 or 4 centuries. And so, what they're doing here, because they like the underdog story so much, and because this isn't written by the Hyksos who were driven out, this is written by people who were escaping oppression in other countries, in Babylon, in Egypt. It's, this Second Temple period. They're viewing themselves, as the underdog.
Uh-oh. Okay, he's going to be back, obviously, because he's saying some good stuff. All right, we're back.
Okay, yeah, Yahweh really doesn't like us tonight. But yeah, so these people, these were people who had been horribly victimized. And so what they're doing is they're taking this old folklore concerning the Hyksos and how horrible they were, and they're inverting it. That's really common in a lot of Jewish. Okay. Yeah, they love these little reversals where they'll take something, they'll flip it on its head, and that's what we're seeing here. They're taking this story in which this Semitic people was like extremely numerous and ruled over everything, and they're saying, oh no, actually, it was us. And we weren't so numerous, but then we were, and they couldn't even stop us. We were unstoppable. And that's what brought on our horrible treatment. We were on the path to greatness, and they hated us for it. And that's what they're trying to do. And you can tell from the people who were like in Babylon,
Yeah.
they have a very different view. They're like, oh, we were punished not because we were on our path to greatness, but because we kept sinning against Yahweh, and we kept doing these horrible things, and we were worshiping all these other gods, and we did this, and and it's all, and they're like, we deserved it, and we deserved worse. And it's like a very different message that you see, because theologically, these people, they have some different opinions. The Bible, each story is going to give you a glimpse into the psyche of the people who wrote it. But yeah, it's a powerful story, and they're deliberately doing this to manipulate people, and it's very powerful in that.
Yes.
And you could just look at how much it's been used for exactly that. And while, obviously I don't have personal experience with this, but I've heard so many times about how black people leaving the church is seen as a betrayal of your entire race,
Oh, for sure.
because these stories like this are being used to intrinsically link blackness with Christianity.
Yes.
And it's that, in my mind, that is absolutely atrocious. Like that is horrible. And but it's like, this is a powerful story, and it's meant to link people with this. If these stories did not link people together and resonate on a personal level, they wouldn't survive.
That's it.
The less impactful religious stories, they died thousands of years ago. It's the ones that are the most successful at manipulating people that last, which is why so many religious teachings are so horribly toxic.
Wow.
Because they hit the hardest,
That's
and
right.
it makes the biggest impact.
Wow.
So yeah, it really was oppressed people who were writing these things. It was just in a different time period, and that's why it appeals so much to oppressed people, because
Yes, sir.
it's just echoing through the generations. That's why Christianity latched on to stories like this so much. It was Jews oppressed by the Romans,
Yes.
and just as in the time of Daniel, or when Daniel was written, not when it pretends to be written, they were being oppressed by a bunch of Greeks, the Seleucids. That's why these stories resonate so much. It's the pain of an oppressed people put
Man.
down on paper, and there's a lot of unhealthy psychological manipulation being thrown into it deliberately.
That's it. That's it.
So yeah,
You know,
that's what we got. And one more thing, when it talks about the two cities, Python, we don't know where that is. The city of Ramses is a reference to Pi-Ramses, which was built in the mid 13th century. We know where that one is, though the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament from around the 160s BC, mentions a third city, being the city of Heliopolis.
oh yeah.
Yeah. I cover a bunch of versions of the Bible on my show.
I love
I
that.
don't just look at one. I have like too many of them.
And it connects a lot of dots for me because I've been absolutely fascinated by Egyptian history for a very long time. It's a very popular conversation in the Black conscious community, as is this Egyptian narrative. It's a very popular
Yeah.
conversation. But I really appreciate you bringing in some insight to that. And I do want to say, for those of you who are part of communities who use these type of narratives, to be mindful of that's these stories were designed to manipulate. They were designed to pull on your heartstrings and kind of give you some type of feeling of justification for your suffering. That takes it out of your hands and puts it in some grand scheme. And I just ask you, I'd encourage you, with as much genuineness as I can, to set up alerts in your life for shit like that. Recognize when someone is manipulating you, because I'm telling you, man, I don't want to see you. Jason, I don't know if you've seen the Hebrew Israelites, but they be out there like in Power Man and like Power Rangers uniforms and shit, and out there, but they have very much attached themselves to this story, to this narrative.
Yeah.
And it's frightening.
Yeah. And stories like this, they can't offer people hope. Because that's what the story of Moses is. It's about a story of hope. And that's like, so many people latch onto that because it gives them hope. And like that's a wonderful thing. But it's also a double-edged sword. It offers hope, but you have to understand that that's all the story should be used for, is an inspirational tale, and watch out for how else that can be used, and understand that it's a fable that was just kind of meant to offer hope.
Yes.
Don't use it as a guide for your life. Look at it the way you would look at Captain America. And be like, you know what? Steve Rogers is a cool guy. I should be more like that. And realize that's not a real dude, okay?
Right.
And so, just understand that. And that, like, I have no problem with people looking at stories and getting hope from them. That's what stories are for.
For sure.
But people also use them all sorts of ways, and that's dangerous. So, be mindful of that.
Man, that's good stuff. Oh my goodness. I don't know if we're going to get through all of chapter 1. This is rich, but you know what? I think this is what people have needed. I think even when we were actually going to church, when we were actually believers, especially when we were genuine, these are the type of conversations we absolutely would have appreciated. If churches were having conversations like this, a genuine interrogation of the faith and just an authentic representation of what we don't know and the things that we actually do know, because that's what killed me, is that there was this pretense is that there was so much that was unknowable. And once I started figuring out about the things that we did know, and I'm like, well, somebody could have been talking about this, like we did know that in the book of or in the book of Exodus, as we get there, that Moses didn't part the Red Sea. We know that. We know that's a mistranslation. So why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah.
All right, so let's journey on.
Yeah. What's next?
This is good. All right, let me pull this back up. There we go. And let me yank us down to the bottom. There we are. All right. So verse 14, and let me click the page so I can mouse it. Yes. And they made their lives bitter with hard labor and mortar. Nope. Verse 15. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra. That's what I'm going to call her. I'm going to call her Shippy. And the other was named Pua. That's not better. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. Now, I'm going to keep reading, but I'm just trying to figure out how these Egyptian midwives are fearing this Hebrew God. But I'm just going to let that pass. We'll come back. So
what I like is that of all the Hebrews there, we've got if you go by the numbers that are mentioned later in the book, we've got about 2.5-3 million Jews out here. Okay, they outnumber the Egyptians at this point, and they only have 2 midwives. It's like, talk to the Hebrew midwives, and there were 2 of them, and here's their names. It's like, whoa, hang on. One was named this, one was named that. It's like, damn. But then we're about to learn that they kind of didn't need the midwives because of the whole circumstances of, the births of these Hebrew babies, which this next part is, it's comedy. Like that's why it's there. It's there to get a laugh.
Wow.
So yeah, go ahead.
Man. Oh, snap. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Their reason for not being there to kill the boys when they're born. That's meant to be comedy.
Oh, this is gold. So verse 18, the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Look at God. Won't he do it? Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to throw into the Nile, but every daughter you are to keep alive. Jason, tell us what the fuck is going on here. What is happening?
Well, for one thing, this Pharaoh, he has forgotten all the good deeds that Joseph did and all that good stuff. And the Hebrews, they're reproducing and stuff. And then, Moses is born. They didn't realize that someone was going to come along later and be like, that was 400 years. Because, that's the same Pharaoh?
Oh,
damn, that dude's old. He must be like one of them dudes from before the flood. He's like Methuselah. Yeah, it's like that's why 1 through 5 and what comes later. These were different authors. Okay, this is all meant to take place over the course of a generation, but we have these other parts where it's like, oh yeah, we were there for 4 centuries being enslaved. And it's like, they're not getting their details right because these are different authors writing at different time periods. Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, that's what that is. And then this command, you're worried about these people getting a leader and rising up and turning against you and all that. And so let's go kill all the babies. The Hebrews, they had 2 different versions of this story already floating around. One was the Babylonian king Nimrod ordering the execution of all the Jewish babies so that Abraham couldn't be born. That's in one of the little apocryphal writings. It's not in Genesis. An angel picks up the baby Abraham flies him to a cave. All the babies get killed. And then Abraham walks out 3 days later, a grown-ass man. And so now Nimrod thinks he's accomplished his goal because the babies are all gone, and he doesn't realize that his rival, who will eventually lead to his downfall, is like 30 years old now. And then it's his son Esau, who later goes and he gets in a fight with Nimrod and kills him. And that's when he staggers back into camp and he's all exhausted. And he's like, look, bro, I got in this huge boss fight. I'm down to 1 hit point. And if I don't get some lentil stew, I'm going to die. And Isaac's like, I tell you what.
Whoa.
Or wait, Jacob and Esau, not Isaac.
Yeah.
That's why he lost his birthright, because he sold his birthright for some stew because he was all injured and stuff, and he needed some food so he wouldn't die because he was exhausted from this fight with Nimrod, who had tried to kill his grandfather whenever he was a baby. The other version of this story is King Duran in Persia. He's trying to kill Zarathustra whenever he's born, and he goes after him and stuff. This is where, like, the Jews got these stories. These were common tropes floating around in literature. That's where that comes along. The slaughter of the innocents to prevent a rival king from coming up. It's folklore.
Wow.
And this is just the Jewish version.
That's incredible. And then, I'll just add to that, there's because someone asked, like, oh man, it's normally the girls that get killed. Why would they be killing the boys? And, that answer is eugenics. The idea is here to kill off the people who can, procreate and, kind of progenate their progenies all over the place.
Yeah. I think there was, there's other stories similar to that. Like the thing that we're about to get to where he's like floating down the river in a wicker basket. That's the story of Sargon. His whole birth thing, Sargon, Cyrus, Zarathustra, Oedipus, Romulus and Remus, Perseus, everybody had these stories. This is just the Jewish version.
Wow.
The details are the details are slightly different.
That's it.
But yeah, so go ahead and continue, because we're about to hit Sargon here.
Yes. I was just about to ask how you felt about hitting another chapter. Let's do it, man.
Yep.
Yeah, like I hope y'all are enjoying this as much as I am. This has been absolutely incredible. The chat is absolutely like blazing up. So I am loving that. We appreciate you all. All right, so we're in chapter 2, and this is the birth of Moses. This is, according to popular legend, this is the guy who's writing the story. So now he's told us about all these things that happened long before he was born. Now he's going to tell us about his birth.
And at the end of Deuteronomy, he's going to write like a whole chapter after he died.
Yes.
Dude is wicked.
After literally writing that he died. Like, it was amazing. Like, that's some good superpowers right there. You know what I'm saying?
It's going to be traumatizing, though. You're sitting there writing, and then he died. Wait, what?
What? I died?
Wait, and he checks his calendar. Oh, God, this is today? Oh, God, that's got to suck.
Oh, that is gold right there. That needs to be a skit. That needs to be a skit. All right, so chapter 2. Let me put it back on the screen. That would be helpful. All right, so now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi, because that's what you do in the South. Mm-hmm. And the woman.
And this is to connect him with the Levites who served in the temple. All the prominent Levites in the Bible have Egyptian names, which is why they're barred from owning land in Israel. And there's another thing that links him with Sargon. His father isn't important. His mother is. It's. Yeah. Holy
shit.
We'll get to a little bit more of that.
Man, like, hey, you're gonna have to make sure you join our Discord, Jason, because I'm sure people are gonna have some questions for you. Because this, Oh my goodness. Okay. So and the woman conceived and gave birth to a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months because that's what you do with beautiful babies. Apparently, Pharaoh
Yeah.
was only killing beautiful babies. If the
Mm-hmm.
baby would have been ugly, it would have been safe because he couldn't
Yeah.
procreate. Nobody's gonna want to sleep with him.
Right.
So he's safe. To the pits he goes. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, while her female attendants walking alongside the Nile, and with her, sorry. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave woman, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And maybe he didn't know he was beautiful. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a woman for you who is nursing from the Hebrew women, so that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now I'm gonna take a break right there. Are there any in particular insights here that you like to share, Jason?
A bunch of them. So
Yes.
things that he has in common with Sargon, just in these few little things. So for anyone who doesn't know, Sargon, he was some historians consider him the first emperor. Others say he wasn't a true empire for assorted reasons. Whatever. So Sargon of Akkad, he went around, he conquered a whole bunch of city-states, put them together under one rule. He was a big deal. And he had this little birth narrative that is pure fiction, but it was good propaganda. And it was basically to endear him with the common people. And his whole thing, so things in common with Moses. His father's unimportant. Mother bore him in secret. He comes from the common people. He's placed in a wicker basket. It's sealed with bitumen. It's placed in a river. It settles in the bulrushes. A drawer of water discovers him. He is drawn out and raised in the palace. And his legitimacy through his rule it comes through divine will. This is like the origin story that then gets used for Moses. Now, there's something wonky here with his name. So he's given the name Moses because it's a Hebrew word that means that he is drawn out. And, because she's like, I drew him out. So he was drawn out of the water, so his name is Moses. And that's crap.
Wow.
I think it's like Moshe would be like he's drawn out. But that's not what his name is. His name is Moses. It's a completely different word. It's an Egyptian name that he has. It's the same thing as Ramsey. It's part of a theophoric name. Like Ramses, Ra, and then MSS. Ramses is, begotten of the sun god Ra. Tutmos, begotten of Thoth. And that's what this is, okay? So what they did here is this was an Egyptian theophoric name. It had the name of a god in front of it, and they chopped that off because they didn't want like an Egyptian god associated with like the leader of their people. So it just gets shortened to Moses, but it's still an Egyptian name. So what they do, they take this Egyptian folk hero, and they're like, we need a Jewish pedigree for him. Where do we get his name? They're like, well, we got this Sargon story. He's drawn out, and being drawn out, Moshe. Okay, there we go. That's close enough to Moses. No one will look too close. All right. So he was drawn out, and that's why his name is Moses. But that's crap, because what they should have the word that they were looking for is Masha, is to draw from. But the closest thing to it is actually mashwe, which means to draw out. And that's like the word that they're using, mashwe. And the problem is it means that Moses is the one drawing something out of the water, not that he is being drawn out.
Yeah.
Which thing in the Hebrew is active, whether it's active or passive. And they're pretending like it's the passive, like, oh, it means that he was drawn out. And no, the word they're using means that he drew something out. The reason is because, remember how I said that the first 5 chapters were added on later?
Yeah.
He got his name from drawing the Hebrews through the Sea of Reeds, drawing them out of Egypt.
Oh, whoa.
And he is now active. He had a different name, and then he drew the people out of Egypt, and that's how he got the name for Moses.
Okay, so
But then they come up with this Sargon story that they add onto the front of it, and they put the naming of him there instead of at the end, instead of like later after they cross the Sea of Reeds and escape. That's why the name doesn't really make any sense. And people who like read Hebrew were like, this doesn't make any sense. It means that Moses took someone out, not this lady. So yeah, that's one of those things that is lost in the translation. But luckily we have like Hebrew scholars who spell this out for us.
That is absolutely beautiful, because I did mention earlier in the chat that I was aware that it wasn't, the Red Sea that Moses crossed, but it was, or that Moses allegedly crossed, right? But the Sea of Reeds in this story. But even then, I had never made the connection that Moses is also born, in this same type of Sea of Reeds situations. And so now, like, I'm having brain palpitations over here. Like, this is, holy snap. This is the most circular story that I've ever seen in my life. And I didn't see it before. Like, this is off the freaking chain. Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit more because we got some more of this chapter. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his fellow Hebrews and looked at their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his fellow Hebrews. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw that there was no one around, he struck and killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. Now he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he said, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." You want me to follow through with a few more verses before we break, or do you got something for this?
So let's touch on this real quick. So the purpose of this little scene right here. So he's being raised in the Egyptian palace, basically where like the Pharaoh is almost like his brother, okay? And while he's being raised in this, he's sort of being seen as having like an Egyptian identity. And now he's presented with the scene in which he has to choose one of 2 paths. This is classic ancient literature. And of course, he chooses the path of his own people. And he kills the Egyptian. This is him killing the Egyptian side of himself and siding with the Hebrews. Okay, my Egyptian identity is now dead. That's what is being hidden away, not an Egyptian corpse. And he is now fully Hebrew. Okay, that's what this is. Now, the next scene, he pops up, and there's these the 2 Hebrews, and they're fighting amongst each other. This is Hebrew lawlessness. Why are they lawless? Because he hasn't given them the law yet. He is a classic lawgiver. He is Hammurabi, the man who formed eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, the basis of the Hebrew law code, which they got from Babylon. And that's why they say, like, who are you to like lead us and give us laws and stuff? This is foreshadowing. They're saying, oh, well, who are you to do this? And it tells, oh, he's the one who's going to do it. Eventually, we're going to get there. these aren't just like two random guys, who are like, oh well, you're gonna like come and kill us or something. That would make no sense. Like he killed this
Yeah.
guy to save him. So no, they represent the Jewish people who need a law.
Yes.
Like they always had laws. As soon as people started clustering together and making permanent settlements, they wrote down some law codes and they lived by that. And this has been the way it is forever. They had laws, okay? They would have been living under Egyptian laws. The Egyptians had laws.
Yes.
This is like, look, before, this grand tale of our mythical lawgiver, we had no laws. This is the book of Judges all over again. Oh, well, this time they were all lawless. And so then these judges came along and they instituted these laws, but then they died and everything was lawless again. So then this other judge, it's the same thing. We need someone to show us, and here's the one to do it. It's introducing the hero and his purpose.
Yes.
And that's what it is. And it's this really genius writing, because it's foreshadowing, it's killing his old identity, siding with his proper people, telling what he's going to become, all through this very short little conversation and two very brief scenes. And then the other layer that gets added on is it uses that to say, oh, people must now know that I'm a murderer and I now have to flee for my life. Look, man, you just killed like some random Egyptian peasant and hid his body, and you're the adoptive brother of the pharaoh. No one cares. It's just like, yeah, he was trying to kill someone. I stepped in. He kind of died. They would have been like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, he has to now flee. This is Jacob. He has now usurped his brother. His brother's pissed off. He's got to flee also to the east so that he can go and then do his thing and meet women at the wells and everything else and, get a family, work for his father-in-law. And then he gets to come back. This is formulaic storytelling here. And that's what we're seeing.
That is godly. That's absolutely fascinating. My mind is just kind of spinning in a lot of different directions, but again, you kind of see why this story appeals, or why this imagery rather appeals to marginalized people so much so, because what you just highlighted is something that is constantly reinforced as long as Moses is involved with the story, and that is that you kind of got to kill the Egyptian within you. Even when we see them in the wilderness 400 years later, it's like as we've preached it in urban churches, the idea was you came out of Egypt, but it took 400 years to get Egypt out of you. And it's often that type of language that is used, especially towards the African American community, and that where America is our kind of Egypt, and it's just like, oh, you're still in the wilderness because even though you're free, you still have America in you. And so so Moses becomes very much of a revolutionary character when we look at him in terms of social movement, someone who has to wrestle with his own double consciousness, his dual consciousness, where I live in this area where I come from the people who are not in power, but I am attached to the people who are in power. And now I have to make this very definitive decision. This imagery is absolutely powerful. It is something that people have attached themselves to. In our community, Harriet Tubman is called the Black Moses, but also Nat Turner, who led a slave rebellion. He attached this uprising to a lot of imagery that was built around what's going on in Exodus, and you're giving us some of the underlying stories. I told people before we started this that I'd probably share some of the sociological things, and you'd share more of that historical mythological aspect. But this insight is so key because it really undermines that. It reminds us of the human touch of what's going on here, and that's been the most beautiful thing about my deconstruction, is being able to look at the Bible as a human work. And once I look at it as the work of humans, there's just all forms of beauty and horrors that are equally there, and I find this absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so we're going to pick up at verse 15. I think we might be able to make it through this chapter.
Yeah, we can do chapter 2.
Yeah. All right, so all right, so we read verse 14. Let's do verse 15. When Pharaoh heard about this matter, he tried to kill Moses because, that's what you do. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Oh, we're already in Midian. Okay.
Anytime you're reading the Bible and a prophet shows up at a well, he's going to talk to a woman about marriage.
Oh, holy crap.
Like, whether it's the story of the patriarchs or the story of Jesus or any of the stories in between, prophet shows up at a well, he's talking to a woman about marriage. The end. Done. It will happen.
Wow. Like even when Isaac's bride is searched for, the person that they send to go for that bride gets to a well, and you bet there's a woman that's, oh my God. Like, this is okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
It's the same stories. They just keep rewriting them
over and over again. Man, it's almost like Star Wars. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna do it. All right, verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to their father Reuel, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian saved us from the shepherds, and what is more, he even drew water for us and watered the flock." So he said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why is it that you've left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." And Moses was willing to live with the man. Okay. And he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses. That escalated quickly. Then she gave birth to a son and named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." All right, let's see here. So there is a stopping point here. Now, of course, it's not naturally in scripture. Do you want to flow on a little bit, or do you have something here?
Let's keep on rolling. All
right, cool. Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. Okay, so now he's no longer the Pharaoh, he's the king.
Yeah. He finally died. After 400 years, he finally croaked.
He's kicked the bucket. Now it came about, and the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not Joseph, mind you. And God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them.
Yeah, so this shows a couple of different things right here. First, the whole thing about like the cries for help rising up into heaven. We have numerous instances of this. Probably the first one is whenever Cain kills Abel. Abel's blood cries up from the ground and it reaches the ears of God. And he's like, "Oh, whoa, what's happening here?" We see this again, like in some of the prophetic works later on in the Bible. The lamentation of the people, it rises up into heaven and it sways Yahweh. And he's like, "You know what? I'm going to go ahead and let y'all out of Babylon and send y'all back into the land of Judah." We see it in the book of Enoch when the giants are running around on earth and they're killing and eating people and stuff. Their wails and prayers rise up into the heavens and the archangels hear it and they bring their words over to El Elyon and they're like, "You got to fix this mess because you've got giants that are eating people down there because the angels keep having sex with humans." And he's like, "Oh, maybe I should just kill them all with some water." Because that's a reasonable response. This is the same thing. The cries of the people, it rises up. And this is the thing where, people, they face to the heavens because they're praying to a sky god and they lift up their hands and they burn incense and the smoke rises up and it carries their prayers up into the heavens. This is what we're seeing here. It's a reference to that idea. That's what they're doing here is they're sending their prayers up. And then as far as like he gets married to this chick and they have a kid and they name the kid because they live in the land of oppression. Well, why would they do that if they're in Midian? They're not being oppressed over there. But this is one of those things where people, they get these names, and their name always means something that is pertinent to the story. Like Zarathustra, his name means priest, and he becomes a priest. His mother's name was Milkmaid, and his father's name was Man Who Breeds Gray Horses. Guess what he did for a living? When they have apt names, you're reading fiction, okay?
Yes,
like, my name is not Bald Podcaster, okay? That's how this works, okay?
Oh my goodness.
So yeah.
Oh man, this is incredible, and again, also what you see in this imagery, and again, and I hope I'm not doing this too much. August is my Black History Month for a lot of reasons, so I'm going to be inserting a lot of this here. But you do see those parallels again, because of course there's this idea that the children of Israel are in this condition for 400 years. And so, as far as popular Black preaching, that's where we go. We go to that parallel, that 400 years from 1770, which doesn't actually work out that way, but it was basically from 1776 to about 20 years ago. This was the adage that we used, and this idea of God, because okay, now this may be coming from my charismatic stuff. From the charismatic world, this was the first time that God stopped speaking to humanity for 400 years. Have you ever heard anything about that, about these periodic 400 years of silence from God, where there was supposed to be one between Genesis and Exodus, and there's supposed to be another one between Malachi and Matthew, where God just shuts up for 400 years? What's up with that?
Right? Yeah. I'm not sure. I used to, like, I had read something that had to do with that particular time frame, but I couldn't find a good scholarly source for it. And I think it was one of those things where someone was like, yeah, here's the reason. And maybe they had like a good argument, but they didn't really have any facts to back it up. So I kind of just moved on with it and, just kind of forgot about the whole thing. But I didn't keep that little tidbit stored in my brain.
But that is such an appropriate commentary, because I realized, like, that was my entire experience with the charismatic faith, is that these people would have ideas about the Bible that weren't rooted in anything. It wasn't grounded in any research. It wasn't, oh, I found this, I found this story. It was just, I read this and I thought this, and so now this makes sense. And this is, this was pretty much how Christianity was for me for nearly 20, almost 30 years. It's very scary. We got another super chat tonight. Like you said, Darante, the best words I have for this is, I've been blessed, bro. Love, love, love y'all. Look out, man. Jason, you and I are out here blessing the people, and they are blessing us back in return. That's beautiful in so many ways, because at the end of the day, I'm in this for community. You know what I'm saying? We're all in this for different reasons, and all of those reasons are valid. My reason is community. I'm a smart guy. I am nowhere nearly as informed as Jason is. So when he and I started talking about this idea, it was no brainer for me. Because just as a person who's lived my whole life committed, to this faith, it feels refreshing to finally be able to kind of look behind the curtain and learn things that I never knew before. And some of those things are like, well, damn, if you would have sold the story to me this way, I might have stayed in a little longer. You know what I'm saying? Oh man. All right. So we've been at it for almost 2 hours. Jason, we're going to bring it into a close right here. But before we do, man, I just want to give you some space to just share whatever's on your mind, on your heart. And of course, don't forget to plug your shit, because that Bible Hub with the Porn Hub, Bible study with the Porn Hub, like, that is freaking genius, like, on so many levels. But yeah, talk to us, man. The stage is yours, and I'm gonna actually pull myself off just so it can be your.
Appreciate that. So first, thanks for having me here. Love hanging out with you. So to find my show, Dragons of Genesis, All you have to do, you can find it on YouTube. Just search Dragons and Genesis podcast. You can also look on any podcast app. It could be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, whatever. And just search Dragons and Genesis and look for the big orange logo with Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. If you find that, you found me. If you want to find merch, resources, a list of recommended reading, books that I use for the show, anything like that, go to dragonsandgenesis.com. If you just search Dragons in Genesis, you're going to find me because I made sure to put myself in, that everywhere. So, and if you go to dragonsandgenesis.com, you'll find links to everything. And then as far as the show, it's a monthly secular Bible study podcast. I pick anywhere from just a few upwards to about 15 or so chapters of the Bible, and I cover them in depth using the best scholarly material I have access to. Any information you find on there, you're going to be able to back that information up with good scholarly articles and books. Things like Erdman's commentary on the Bible, the Hermeneia commentary, things like that. I spend a lot of money buying good, good scholarly work to use for the show. Some of the books I use cost, I think I have one on my shelf that cost about $250. You don't have access to that. That would be ridiculous for you to spend that money. So I spend that money so I can get that information and that material and plug it in where it's most valuable to understanding the text, and then disseminate that information free of charge. The audio format podcast has no ads. It never has. It never will. It's completely free. There are ads on the YouTube channel. I try to keep it to just a few ads per episode. And the purpose of the podcast is just to provide anyone who's interested with information to help them better understand these stories that I find fascinating. I don't interject my own opinions very often. When I do, I put a disclaimer in advance. What follows is just my personal opinion. That way you don't get confused as to what is scholarly information and what is just me talking out my ass. And the whole purpose is just to help people understand. I leave the theology out of it. I'll sometimes mention how it is used in, by various religions. But as far as like trying to sway people theologically, I leave that at the door. This is just the information. So if you have friends who are religious, they'll probably find something useful in the show. About a quarter of the people who listen to my podcast are religious. Some are pastors. Some use my show to write sermons. So this isn't like an atheist-only thing. I don't bash religion. I just present the stories as they're found and provide context for them the same way I'm doing here. So that's a rundown of Dragons and Genesis. And hopefully you find it useful.
Man, well, I think for anybody who didn't know you, which I'm sure quite a few of the people who are watching tonight are watching because you're here. But for those who didn't know you, I know they're going to be looking for your channel now. Again, because this is valuable information, and I'll just kind of circle back to one of the questions I asked in the beginning. When I asked, did you know, when you started doing this, that this would actually hit a nerve? And you, just like me, had no clue. Like, it was really just something we were doing for ourselves. And there's a beauty in that, though. It's really when you really truly start doing things for yourselves that you find value for other people. Norbert had made a comment earlier today, and I did platform it. But he made the comment that, this is what we were trying to do when we were trying to be men of God. Mm-hmm. And that was just share information and truth and integrity and authenticity. And that has been the greatest freedom. I know for me, it's a weird thing to say, but I feel more like a pastor now than I ever have before. at least as far as the thing that I wanted to be when I was being a pastor. And that was somebody who represented truth, who represented grace, you know, and who represented love. And I'm finally outside of a construct that really kept me from doing that before. And it's just like, you know, it's such a beautiful place. And it's one of the things that I love that you said, that in your channel, you're not bashing religion. You know, I take a few shots, but that's just because comedy is a part of who I am. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I take a few shots. But at the end of the day, there really is no productivity in just bashing religion just for the sake of bashing it. It's much more productive to give people understanding about how these things came to be and how these things were shaped. And really, that almost always removes the curtain for people. And it's just it's freeing, it's liberating, and you don't have to go through the angry atheist phase. So for any of you who are watching who are believers, please know it's not our intention to tell you to leave your faith. But if you find anything in this conversation that's worth exploring, then in good faith, explore that. You know, after all, the Bible does say, in all of your getting, get understanding. And at the end of the day, in these type of conversations, that's precisely what we're trying to help people do, is to just get understanding. And whatever you do with that understanding, hey, that is absolutely up to you. All right.
Yeah.
So I've said enough. Jason, I cannot thank you enough for being here with me. You're going to be back next week, right? Like, I haven't
I'll be
scared
here
you
next
off
week.
yet, have I? Awesome. All right. Y'all heard that. I did not scare him off. He's not weirded out by me drinking Four Locos, so we're good.
Well, a little bit. Weirded out.
Oh, yeah.
I won't hold it
Jason is
against
my
you,
dude.
though.
Jason is my dude. Oh, and we had that conversation before. Like, I'm going to have to get you in some Sunday sessions too, man. Like, I didn't. You know, I try not to bother people because, you know, I try to pay attention to what other people are doing on their channels. And like, I don't ever know if people want to do a little bit more than that. But after talking to you tonight, even just before we jumped into this, just some of the pre-show stuff, I'm definitely going to be reaching out to you to jump into some of our Sunday sessions conversations a few times, just to provide some nuance. Because at the end of the day, that's what the fuck community is. Jason, thank you for being on. I'm going to do my last bit of spiel. I'm going to put you in the back room. Do you want to say anything else to the people before I take you off the stage?
Stay healthy, stay safe, read your Bible, and keep doing the Lord's work.
I love it. Read that Bible. Keep doing the Lord's work. Stay healthy. And drink some water. Get you some sunshine. This has been one of the most phenomenal live episodes that I've been able to participate in. Please go support Jason's channel. If there are ways to give and support him financially, if he has a patron, find it and do so when I bring him back, when we come back next week, because I'm not bringing him. We in this together. When we come back next week, I'll make sure that I have him talk about different ways that you can support that work financially. Because again, it's y'all, this is needed. This is necessary, right? I've been enjoying the chat, enjoying the chat so much with your engagement. This is beautiful. It blesses my heart in so many different ways. Just to hit a few house things, man. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video to let other people know that these are the type of conversations that are happening. Let's normalize these conversations. And the big point that I want to make, the real reason, and y'all have heard me talk about it, but the real reason I'm excited about stuff like this is because this is what community is. Community is not platforming somebody who has an attractive voice and an attractive idea. You know, that's a personality cult. Community is bringing us all together and finding ways to appreciate the unique value that we can all contribute to forward progress. And that's what we're doing here. And for me, that forward progress is for the forward progress of humanity in whatever ways we can help. I have no hidden agendas. I'm not looking for everybody to become atheist, even though that would be nice. You know, I wouldn't be mad at it. But the goal is to just help us learn how to interact with each other a little better, to give each other a little more grace, and to actually understand the world that we live in, you know? And these sessions are like fuck, it's almost like coffee and weed and cocaine all together. It's like everything you need, man. And so with that being said, please be back here with us next week. And think about bringing a friend. I know I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. Share this. Share this with somebody who you think will appreciate this, who you think will pull some value from this. And then, like, don't share it just to annoy people. I mean, you can. I'm not going to stop you from it. And I might even get some jollies out of it. But let's just share it. Let's look for people who no, I think somebody needs this. This was fascinating. Jason has a lot of insight, and that's the thing. And I'm gonna shut up in a few minutes, but I want y'all to remember this. There's the old analogy of the blind men touching the elephant, trying to describe what it is. None of them have the capacity to touch the whole elephant. That's how important we are to each other. You know what I'm saying? We don't have the capacity to see the whole picture. But man, Jason has such a beautiful viewpoint. And I think my viewpoint isn't that bad either. And then some of you have some nice viewpoints. We need it all. That's what community is. So that we can figure out what the fuck we're feeling on and whether it's legal or not. All right, so I'm done there. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with me. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Consider joining our growing community, man, on Patreon, Discord, right here on YouTube. Definitely bring your asses back next week because we're going to be having more conversation just like this. And we'll be jumping into Exodus chapter 3. This was one hell of a pre-show. I think we got a lot of context. This shit right here is magical. You know what I'm saying? Again, coffee, weed, cocaine, all together right here. You're getting all of it. Come get your sugar rush, your high, and all that jazz right here. As you can see, I'm amped, but I'm going to go ahead and roll out. I love y'all so much. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. Only if you can. I'll holler at you later.